Two bullets, a bleeding crime boss, a waitress who almost failed nursing school. She had 30 seconds to save him, or watch him die on the counter. She saved him. And that one decision destroyed her entire life. Her apartment burned. Killers came for her in the alley. She had nowhere left to run, except straight into the arms of the man she'd brought back from the dead. This channel tells the stories nobody else dares to. Mob empires, dangerous obsession, and the extraordinary love found in the darkest of places. Sometimes the moment that costs you everything is also the moment that gives you something worth far more. Stay with us till the end. And if this story moves you, like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.
The Midnight Owl Diner was a rundown spot off a dark highway near Chicago, an 80s throwback that always smelled like burnt coffee, harsh cleaning chemicals, and old cooking oil. It was a haven for the lonely and the lost, the people who liked the cover of darkness. Nora Hayes liked working the late shift. At 24, the job covered her rent, let her avoid people, and gave her quiet time to read her worn-out nursing school books. A brutal rainstorm hammered against the diner's big front windows. The broken neon sign flickered, reading the Midnight O, and buzzed loudly. Nora was cleaning the counter of booth 4, thinking about how she would afford her tiny Logan Square apartment next month. Only two other customers were there, a tired truck driver named Pete, sleeping over his cold breakfast, and Mr. Henderson, a hard-of-hearing old mechanic focused on a crossword. Suddenly, the bell on the door didn't ring. It was shattered with a violent crash. The door flew open so hard the glass cracked on its frame. Wind and rain poured inside, carrying that sharp, metallic scent of blood. Two figures collapsed through the doorway. The one standing was huge, his expression pure terror, his expensive suit soaked with rain and blood. He was barely holding up the other man, who was limp and dragging on the linoleum. Pete the trucker snapped awake. He saw the big black pistol in the first man's hand, and that was enough. Pete jumped from his seat, tossed a wrinkled $20 bill on the table, and ran out the back door. Mr. Henderson never noticed, completely lost in his search for a six-letter word for disaster. Nora was paralyzed behind the counter, gripping a wet cloth. "Lock the door now," the man screamed, his Irish accent thick with panic. His eyes were frantic, like a trapped animal's, and his hair was a mess. His name was Finnick O'Connor, but Nora would learn that later. She couldn't move. Her heart pounded inside her chest. "I said, lock it," Finnick repeated, pointing the gun right at her. "Now, unless you want to get hurt." Fear finally gave way to the need to survive. Nora dropped the cloth, ran to the entrance, and forced the door closed against the storm before locking the deadbolt. With shaking hands, she lowered the metal security gate. When she looked back, Finnick had put the wounded man on the main counter, pushing aside the napkin holders and shakers, which crashed to the ground. The man on the counter wore a costly, custom-made charcoal suit, now ripped and soaked with the blood spreading around him. But it was his face, pale and twisted in pain, that made Nora stop breathing. He had sharp, defined features, high cheekbones, a strong jaw with dark stubble, and jet-black hair stuck to his skin. She knew who he was. Every person in Chicago who followed the news would recognize that face. It was Declan Fitzpatrick, the new leader of the Fitzpatrick crime family, the man said to own the docks, the unions, and many state officials. He was a ghost, a legend in a designer suit, and he was bleeding to death on her counter. "He's hurt bad," Finnick said, his hands pressed hard against Declan's side below his ribs, with another injury by his collarbone. Blood pulsed between Finnick's fingers with a frightening regularity. "The clinic is 20 minutes from here. He'll never survive. He's lost too much blood." "You need to call an ambulance," Nora whispered, her voice shaking. "No police, no emergency rooms," Finnick growled, turning on her with the gun up. "The Russo family has lookouts at every hospital in a 10-mile radius. They set this up. He'll be killed before a surgeon can even see him." Declan groaned, a deep sound from his chest, and his head fell to the side. His lips were becoming blue. The pool of blood grew, dripping onto the checkered tiles. He's going into hypovolemic shock, Nora said, the words coming out automatically, too. Years of nursing training, abandoned when her mother got sick, came rushing back to her mind. Finnick looked at her, his aim faltering. What did you say? His blood pressure is crashing, Nora explained, her voice gaining strength as her old training took over. She was still terrified, but the need to help a dying man was stronger than her fear of him. If that arterial bleed isn't stopped, his heart will fail in under 3 minutes. Then do something, Finnick screamed, grabbing her apron and pulling her close. Fix him, or you're going to die with him. Get that gun out of my face or he dies now, Nora yelled. The sharp command in her tone surprised them both. She pushed his hand off her. I can't do anything while you're pointing that at me. Go wash your hands at the kitchen sink. Use hot water and plenty of soap. Move. Finnick stared, confused by this small waitress giving him orders. But a weak sound from Declan made him obey. He put the gun in his belt and ran to the sink. Nora acted with urgent focus. She ran to the office and kicked the door in to get the big first aid kit from the wall. It wouldn't be enough. Gauze pads couldn't fix a major bleed. She grabbed 2 clean aprons, a bottle of strong vodka from under the counter, and a roll of duct tape. Back at the counter, she pushed Finnick out of the way. I need you to hold the flashlight on your phone and aim it here. Don't move it. She opened the vodka, poured some on her hands, and flinched as it stung. Then she poured the rest over Declan's wounds. His eyes shot open. They were a sharp, stormy gray, wide with pain and shock. He let out a raw scream and his hand clamped around her wrist with incredible force. Hold still, Nora said, meeting his intense gaze. I know it hurts. You've been shot. I need to stop the bleeding. Declan looked dazed and delirious, but his eyes stayed on her. His grip was painful, but he didn't move her hand away. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Nora pulled out a pair of kitchen scissors and began cutting through his expensive shirt, revealing a broad, tattooed chest. The injury near his collarbone went straight through, but hadn't hit anything vital. The wound in his side was the one killing him. Dark blood was pumping out steadily. She figured a major vein, or his liver was hit. Gauze, Nora ordered. Finnick threw the whole box at her. She pressed wad after wad of gauze into the wound, but the blood soaked through immediately. The bleeding is too fast. Pressure won't work, she said, her professional calm starting to crack. I have to cauterize it. Cauterize it? Finnick shouted. Are you crazy? You work in a diner. I'm your only option, Nora shot back. Go to the kitchen grill, grab that metal spatula, light the burner and get the tip red hot. Finnick obeyed without another word. He hurried to the grill. The clicking sound of the stove's igniter echoed in the quiet diner, followed by the whoosh of the flame. Nora glanced back at Declan. He was losing consciousness, his eyes closing. Hey, stay with me, she urged, tapping his face. Keep your eyes open. His mouth moved, forming a quiet word she could barely hear. She leaned down to listen. Angel? He whispered, a bit of blood on his lips. Are you here to take me? Not today, Nora replied firmly. Today, you just get the waitress. It's ready, Finnick yelled, running back with the spatula in a towel. Its end was glowing a bright, angry red. Pin his shoulders to the counter, Nora commanded. He will fight it. Use your weight. Finnick pressed down, using his huge frame to hold his boss against the pastry display. Nora's hands trembled as she took a sharp breath. She had one chance. A miss would destroy healthy tissue, and he would still bleed to death. I am so sorry, she whispered to Declan. She plunged the glowing hot metal directly into the wound, right on top of the gushing artery. A sickening sizzle filled the air, followed by the awful, sharp smell of burnt flesh and blood. Declan let out a pain-filled scream so loud it rattled the diner's glass windows. His body arched up from the counter with so much force it almost threw the massive Finnick off. Declan's hands gripped the counter's edge, his knuckles turning pure white. His eyes rolled back into his head before the overwhelming pain finally made him pass out. Nora yanked the spatula back and threw it into the metal sink with a loud crash. She grabbed a stack of clean linen aprons, folded them into a thick pad, and pushed down hard on the cauterized wound. She then wrapped heavy duct tape around Declan's torso several times, securing the makeshift bandage tightly against his body. She stepped away, breathing heavily, her own uniform soaked with his blood. She watched his chest for 1 second, 2 seconds, three. It rose, then fell in a shallow but steady rhythm. The bleeding had stopped. Finnick felt for a pulse on his boss's neck and let out a shaky breath that sounded like a sob. He is alive. My God, he is alive. 30 minutes later, a squeal of tires announced a sleek, black, unmarked medical van. 3 people hurried inside, led by a sharp-eyed, elegant older woman with 2 large black medical bags. She was Dr. Sofia Calvetti, the syndicate's private trauma surgeon. Sophia surveyed the scene. The blood-soaked counter, the vodka bottle, the duct tape, and the burnt spatula in the sink. She quickly checked Declan's vital signs and the bandage. She glanced at Nora, who was huddled near the coffee makers, shivering in the diner's warmth. "You did this?" Sophia asked, her Italian accent making the words sound clipped. Nora just nodded. "You saved his life," Sophia stated quietly. "A millimeter to the left, and you would have destroyed his liver. Your method was brutal, but it was perfect. He would have been dead 20 minutes ago." The medical team swiftly moved Declan onto a stretcher. As they carried him out, Finnick paused in front of Nora. He dug into his bloody jacket and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills held by a rubber band. He tossed it on the counter. It looked like at least $10,000. "You did not see anything tonight," Finnick said, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "No cops, no talking to anyone, nothing. For your own good, you forget this happened." Nora just stared at the blood-stained money. When she finally looked up, the diner was silent and empty. The only signs that the king of Chicago's underworld nearly died on her counter were the puddle of blood on the floor and the lingering metallic smell in the air. 3 weeks went by. For Nora, it felt like a terrifying, endless wait. She had used the first 3 days to scrub the diner with bleach until her hands were raw, trying to get rid of the imaginary smell of burnt blood. She left the money untouched, hiding the bloody stack inside a hollowed-out book under her floor. It felt cursed. She checked the local news each morning, half expecting a headline about Declan Fitzpatrick's death. But she found nothing. There were no death notices, no signs of a new gang war on the streets. The syndicate's legitimate businesses, like shipping and real estate, ran as usual. It was as if that stormy night at the Midnight Owl had been nothing but a bad dream. Nora attempted to slip back into her daily life. She served breakfast to Pete the trucker, poured coffee for Mr. Henderson, and returned to her small, drafty apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. But something had changed. The shadows felt longer now. It began with small things, like a dark car idling at the end of her street as she walked home, or a stranger in a long coat who sat in a booth, ordered only black coffee, and watched her every move for his entire shift. Nora convinced herself she was just being paranoid. The Fitzpatrick syndicate wanted her to forget, so they were leaving her alone. That is how it worked, was it not? She was mistaken. She simply did not realize who was now hunting her. It was a Tuesday evening, and she had a rare night off. Nora was walking up the poorly lit alley behind her apartment, carrying groceries. The streetlights above flickered, throwing long, warped shadows across the dumpsters. "Nora Hayes." The voice emerged from the darkness by the fire escape. Nora stopped cold, her fingers clenching the paper grocery bag. A man appeared in the weak light. He was not from the diner. This man was thin, wearing a cheap leather jacket with a jagged scar that ran from his ear to his collar. He had a mean, lopsided smile. 2 other men stepped out from the shadows behind him, cutting off her path to the street. "Who are you?" Nora asked, backing away until she felt the hard brick wall against her shoulders. The name is Dominic, the scarred man replied casually, drawing a long, serrated knife from his belt. I work for Tobias Russo. I am sure you have heard of him. Nora felt a chill run down her spine. The Russo family were the rivals, the ones who had tried to kill Declan. I do not know who that is, Nora lied, her voice shaking. I have no money. You can just take my groceries. Dominic chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. We do not want your fruit, sweetheart. 3 weeks ago, we had our target right where we wanted him on Highway 41. We put 2 bullets in him. We watched him bleed. He was supposed to die right there. But our inside source tells us he somehow survived. And word is, his car was seen outside some dirty little diner before he reached his private doctor. He moved a step closer, the knife blade glinting in the faint light. Toby Russo is very unhappy. That operation cost him a lot of money. He wants to know how Declan Fitzpatrick managed to live, and he wants to make an example of the person who interfered. I do not know what you are talking about, Nora said, struggling to breathe. She desperately looked for a way out, but the alley was a dead end. Grab her, Dominic ordered his men. Put her in the trunk. Toby wants to personally tear her apart. His 2 large men charged at her. Nora screamed and hurled the heavy grocery bag at the first man's face. Cans of food and oranges scattered across the ground. She tried to run past them, but a hand grabbed her hair, pulling her back with such force that she saw spots. She was slammed hard against the brick wall, knocking the wind from her lungs. Dominic moved in, pressing the flat, cold blade of his knife against her cheek. Stupid girl. You are going to do a lot of screaming tonight. Just then, the roar of a powerful engine broke the alley's silence. A sleek, armored black SUV sped into the tight space, its headlights blindingly bright. It did not stop. It slammed right into one of Dominic's men, crushing his leg against a dumpster with a horrible crunching sound. The man screamed and collapsed. Dominic spun around, trying to shield his eyes from the lights as he raised a gun. But before he could shoot, the SUV's back doors opened. 4 men jumped out, moving with frightening speed and coordination. Silenced guns hissed in the night. Dominic's second man fell immediately, clutching his shattered knee. Dominic himself was shot in the shoulder, which spun him around and sent his knife flying into the darkness. Do not move, Russo trash! A familiar, rough Irish voice echoed in the alley. Finnick came into the light, pointing a heavy assault rifle at Dominic's head. Or I will splatter your brains all over this wall. Nora slid down the brick wall as her legs gave out. She trembled uncontrollably, staring at the sudden violence. The back door of the SUV opened a little more. A figure emerged into the damp night. He walked more slowly now, leaning on a cane with a silver handle, but his presence was just as intense and powerful. Declan Fitzpatrick was dressed perfectly in a dark navy suit. The pale, near-dead man from the diner was gone. In his place stood Chicago's top predator, his stormy gray eyes focused directly on Nora. He walked toward her, the rhythmic tapping of his cane echoing above the moans of the wounded men. He stopped directly in front of her and looked down. Dominic, Declan said, his gaze still fixed on Nora. His voice was smooth, deep, and held absolute power. Tell Toby Russo that if he ever sends his men into my territory again, I will not just kill his men. I will torch his whole compound to the ground with him inside it. Go to hell, Fitzpatrick, Dominic spat through clenched teeth. Declan did not even bother to look at him. He just gave a small nod. Finnick stepped forward and slammed the butt of his rifle into Dominic's jaw, knocking him unconscious. Declan finally bent down, wincing as the motion seemed to strain his healing injuries. He held out a large, warm hand to Nora. I told you I was just a waitress, Nora whispered, looking at his hand like it was a weapon. Your guy told me to forget everything. I wanted to forget. Declan's voice was low. I know. For just a moment, the hardened mob boss disappeared. I also tried to leave you alone. But men like the Russos see patterns everywhere, and I had my people watching to be sure they hadn't found you. Tonight they did. What happens now? Nora asked. the tears of pure exhaustion finally tracing paths down her face. You rescued me, so we are even. Can you please let me go? Declan's jaw went rigid. He took her hand, his touch both firm and gentle as he helped her up. The warmth from his skin fought against the alley's biting cold. This is not even, Nora, Declan stated, his stare locking onto hers and holding her captive. You brought a dead man back to life. In my world, that creates a blood debt. Toby Russo now knows your name. You will be dead before sunrise if I leave you here. I can hide, she argued. I can just vanish. There is no hiding from them, Declan answered, his voice dropping to a low rumble that made her skin crawl. But they cannot harm what is mine. Nora's eyes shot wide open. I am not yours. You are now, Declan declared, moving toward the waiting SUV. Get in the vehicle, Angel. You have worked your last shift at the diner. The Fitzpatrick property in Lake Forest was less a house and more a fortress, a grand monument to generations of wealth. It sat on 10 acres of perfect lawns that overlooked the turbulent, dark waters of Lake Michigan. The limestone palace was guarded by 12-foot wrought iron gates, advanced thermal cameras, and men in sharp suits who moved with the disciplined stillness of former soldiers. Nora awoke tangled in cool, heavy linens. The bed felt softer than any she had ever known. The room itself was enormous, painted in calm shades of gray and white. Windows from the floor to the ceiling framed a stunning but frightening view of the lake. When she reached for the polished handle of the balcony doors, it refused to move, locked from the outside. A sharp, cold wave of panic sliced through the fog of her exhaustion. She was a captive, trapped in a very luxurious prison. She kicked off the sheets and saw she was in a silk gown she had never seen before. Her own jeans and the diner uniform she wore were gone. Spotting a thick cashmere robe on a velvet chair, she pulled it on, cinching it tight before walking to the heavy oak door. It swung open to reveal a long, carpeted hall filled with classic paintings and antique lights. Standing just outside her room was a familiar face. Finnick stood with his hands clasped neatly behind his back. He looked much calmer than he had at the diner, wearing a starched white shirt and a gray vest. The bulge of a firearm under his arm, however, spoiled the otherwise elegant look. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," Finnick said with a polite but noticeable Irish accent. "I hope you got some rest. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hughes, has left some clothes for you in the connected dressing room. We are serving breakfast in the sunroom." "I do not want breakfast," Nora replied, her voice strained. "I want my own clothes, my cell phone, and a taxi to my apartment." Finnick gave her a smile that was both kind and completely unyielding. "I am sorry, but that will not be possible." The boss was very clear with his orders. "You cannot leave this house alone, and you are definitely not going back to your old place. That building has been dealt with. Your things are on their way here." "He dealt with my apartment?" Nora's voice rose, the sound bouncing off the tall, arched ceiling. "He is not allowed to do that. This is a kidnapping. Call it a relocation to ensure you keep breathing, dear," a new voice cut in. Nora spun around to see Dr. Sophia Calvetti striding down the hall with a doctor's bag. She gave Nora a quick professional nod. "At 4 o'clock this morning, men working for Tobias Russo burned down your building. The official story is a gas leak. The unofficial one involves 3 men with fuel cans and a lighter. You would be nothing but ash if Declan had not gotten you out of there." The news struck Nora with the force of a punch. Her legs went weak, and she grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. Her schoolbooks, old photos of her mom, the entire small life she had worked so hard to create, was gone. An immense sense of loss washed over her. That feeling was instantly replaced by a hot, furious anger. "Where is he?" Nora demanded, her gaze sharp. Finnick paused, glancing toward Dr. Calvetti, who just gave a small shrug. "He is in the study finishing his intravenous antibiotics. Do not get him too worked up." Nora did not bother waiting for anyone to lead her. She stormed past Finnick, making her way through a maze of corridors until she reached a pair of huge mahogany doors. Two more silent, imposing guards stood on either side. They moved to open the doors for her as she got closer. The study had the scent of leather, strong coffee, and the clean, sharp smell of antiseptic. Behind a giant desk made of dark walnut sat Declan Fitzpatrick. He looked worn out. The shadows under his gray eyes were deep against his sharp features. He had on a dark shirt that was loose enough for the thick bandages underneath. He was reviewing a pile of financial reports with cold focus. He glanced up when she burst in. Any sign of irritation on his face was replaced by a careful, neutral look. "You destroyed my life," Nora accused, her voice trembling with anger as she walked straight to his desk. "Toby Russo destroyed your apartment," Declan corrected her calmly, placing his expensive gold pen on the desk. "I told you they were not going to give up. I just made sure you were not there when it happened." "So what is the plan?" she shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "I am supposed to live here now, like some kind of pet in a gilded cage?" "I have my own life, Declan. I have tuition for nursing school. I have bills." Declan got to his feet. He moved slowly, trying to hide the pain that was coming from his healing wound. But his large frame still filled the room. He took a sleek, black Centurion card from the desk and slid it across the glossy surface toward her. "Your bills are handled," Declan said, his voice a deep growl. "Your full tuition for the nursing program at Chicago Memorial is paid for the next 4 years through a private fund. For anything else you require, use this." Nora just stared at the black credit card like it was a poisonous snake. "You actually believe you can purchase me? That you can fix this whole mob war problem with money?" Declan came around the desk, a slight limp in his step, and stopped just inches away from her. The difference in their heights was immense. Nora had to crane her neck to meet his eyes. This close, she noticed the faint lines of stress around his mouth, the strain of running an empire while his body struggled to heal itself. "I do not purchase people, Nora," Declan said. His voice had softened, the cold edge of a crime boss giving way to the tired man beneath. "I take care of what belongs to me. You saved my life. You literally reached inside my chest and pulled me out of the darkness. Russo has marked you because of what you did. You will remain here until Tobias Russo is gone, and his organization is finished. You will have protection. You will have everything you need. But you cannot go beyond these gates." "How long is that going to take?" she asked in a whisper, all the fight gone from her, leaving only a cold sense of fear. Declan reached out and used his large, rough thumb to gently move a piece of her hair back into place. The touch was so unexpectedly gentle that it sent a shock through her. "As long as it takes to make the streets safe again," he replied quietly. "Welcome to the family, Angel." The next 2 weeks settled into a bizarre and suffocating pattern. Nora could go anywhere she wanted inside the house and the walled-in gardens, but she was always being watched by the security team. She spent most of her time in the huge 2-level library, studying rare medical books and new journals that Declan had acquired just for her. She began to learn the rhythm of the house. She discovered that Declan liked his coffee black, survived on fewer than 4 hours of sleep, and conducted meetings in a basement conference room that made his men look shaken. She also found out that he was not just ruthless, but also incredibly smart. He did not lead with intimidation, but with a precise and calculated strategy, and she realized that he was observing her as well. She would often glance up from a book and see him in the library doorway, leaning on a cane with a silver handle, quietly watching her. The space between them felt heavy, alive with a silent conflict of gratitude, imprisonment, and a growing, dangerous attraction. He was always respectful of her space, but his constant presence felt like a heavy weight that defined her new existence. That delicate balance was broken on a Thursday evening. A thick, sticky humidity had descended over Lake Michigan, which brought a fierce thunderstorm that shook the mansion's windows. Declan had arranged an urgent meeting with his closest advisors. His top captains, including Finnick and a sharp, watchful man named Silas, were in the main dining room, pretending to have a formal dinner. Nora had gone to the library, attempting to read a chapter on heart medication, but the loud, indistinct voices from down the hall made concentration impossible. The syndicate was losing a fortune. Men loyal to Russo had seized 3 shipping containers down at the Chicago port, and fighting back was getting expensive. Just after 11 at night, the massive oak doors to the dining room flew open. Nora was leaving the library and saw Silas stagger into the hall. The capo's face was ghostly pale, covered in a sudden heavy sweat. He grabbed his chest, his eyes rolled back, and he fell onto the priceless Persian rug. His body immediately began to jerk in a series of violent, stiff spasms. The scene exploded into chaos. Finnick instantly drew his weapon, his eyes scanning the empty hall for an enemy. Declan appeared right after him, his expression a mask of pure, cold rage. "Find Sophia right now!" Declan shouted, dropping to his knees next to his convulsing lieutenant. Nora acted on instinct. A surge of adrenaline erased any fear she had of the armed men all around her. She raced down the hallway and slid onto the floor next to Silas. "Get back," she commanded Declan, pushing him by the shoulder. "He's having a heart attack," Finnick shouted, reaching for his phone. "This is not a heart attack," Nora shot back, her gaze sweeping over Silas's face. She gripped his jaw, prying his mouth open and leaning in to smell his breath. A faint, sickeningly sweet odor was present, like bitter almonds and garlic. His pupils were like pinpricks. "He's turning blue. The convulsions are rigid, not shaking." She looked at Declan, her own heart pounding. What has he eaten or had to drink? We all had the same scotch. "Macallan, 25, Declan answered, his thoughts racing. "But Silas is on medication. He swallowed a pill just before we ate." "Who gave it to him?" Nora demanded. Declan's expression went dark, as a terrible truth began to dawn on him. He glanced up at one of the younger guards. A quiet, plain driver named Leo was standing near the dining room entrance. Leo saw the look on Declan's face, spun around and ran for the service exit. "I want him alive," Declan yelled to Finnick. Finnick took off without a second thought, chasing after the traitor. Nora refocused on Silas. "It's an organophosphate or a synthetic nerve agent. It was inside the pill. His breathing is about to stop." Dr. Sofia Calvetti came running down the hall, her medical kit in hand. Nora didn't give her time to ask anything. "Probable neurotoxin poisoning ingested by a capsule about 10 minutes ago," Nora reported with clinical speed. "He needs the maximum dose of atropine immediately, and we have to intubate or he will drown in his own fluids." Sophia did not question her. She unzipped the bag, grabbed a syringe of atropine, and threw a laryngoscope and an endotracheal tube to Nora. "You handle the airway. I will administer the drugs." Nora's hands were perfectly steady. She tilted Silas's head back with practiced ease, sliding the metal blade of the scope past his tongue to see the vocal cords. "I have a visual," she announced, guiding the plastic tube into his windpipe as Sophia injected the medicine into Silas's thigh. For 2 very long minutes, Nora squeezed the ambu bag by hand, pushing air into the capo's paralyzed lungs. Gradually, the intense seizures started to calm down. The awful blue color of his lips slowly returned to a pale, unhealthy pink. Sophia felt for a pulse. "It's getting stronger. We have to get him to the underground clinic and onto a ventilator now." As guards moved in to lift the unconscious Silas onto a stretcher, Nora fell back against the dark wood paneling. She was gasping for air, her hands suddenly shaking without control now that the adrenaline was gone. The hall emptied, leaving just Nora and Declan. He stood over her. Outside, the storm was wild, and a flash of lightning lit up the sharp, brutal lines of his face. The reality of what just occurred settled in the air between them. Tobias Russo had paid off one of Declan's own soldiers. The enemy was now inside the gates. Declan reached down, took Nora by her upper arms, and pulled her effortlessly to her feet. He held on, slowly backing her up until she was against the wall. He was very close, his body trapping her. He had the scent of rain, fine scotch, and the dangerous iron smell of a man preparing for battle. "You've done it a second time," Declan whispered, his voice incredibly raw. His turbulent gaze studied her face, taking in every trace of her fatigue. My stronghold has been breached. My own men can be bought. And yet, the waitress from a late-night diner is all that keeps my family from being buried. I am a nurse, Nora said, unable to break his intense stare. This is my job. You are a damn miracle, Declan corrected, his voice becoming a low, almost worshipful whisper. Before she could understand the change in his tone, Declan's hand moved from her arm to her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He lowered his head and his lips crushed down on hers. It was not a soft kiss. It was rough and desperate, driven by the rush of a near-death experience and betrayal. It had the flavor of scotch and complete ownership. Nora gasped into his mouth, her hands rising instinctively to press against his chest. But the second her palms met the hard muscle of his shirt, her own body turned on her. She fisted his shirt in her hands, pulling him in, and matched the fierce, demanding pressure of his kiss. For someone who was always in command, Declan kissed her like a drowning man, and she was the last pocket of air in the world. When he finally broke away, they were both breathing hard. Declan pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes shut. Leo will tell us every move Russo is making, Declan said quietly, his voice deadly serious, a complete mismatch to their close embrace. And then this war will be over. But you need to know this, Nora. He opened his eyes, holding her gaze with a look of terrifying certainty. You are not a debt to me anymore. You are mine. The storm ended just before sunrise, replaced by a thick, heavy fog that blanketed the perfect lawns of the Lake Forest estate. The air inside felt just as suffocating, filled with the metallic promise of coming violence. Nora sat on her bed, completely dressed in dark pants and a thick sweater. She hadn't slept. Her lips still felt the burn from Declan's kiss, a moment where their two worlds had collided. It was a clear sign that she was no longer just a medical resource or a favor to be repaid. She was now tangled deep within the Fitzpatrick syndicate. In the soundproofed basement, Declan and Finnick were questioning the traitor, Leo. The idea of a mafia interrogation made Nora's stomach turn, but her mind clinically pictured the brutal physics of the violence happening beneath her. At 6 in the morning, her bedroom door swung open. Declan was in the doorway. His white shirt was open at the neck, the sleeves pushed up to show forearms taut with stress and dotted with tiny dark drops of blood. His face was like a stone carving, but his stormy gray eyes softened just a little when he saw her. Is it done? Nora asked, her voice sounding hoarse in the heavy silence. Declan went into the attached bathroom, turned on the water, and started to scrub his hands with a rough cake of soap. Leo talked, Declan said over the sound of the faucet. Russo threatened his little sister, said he would cut her up if Leo didn't put the neurotoxin in Silas's pill. Nora leaned on the bathroom doorframe. So Russo is trying to isolate you. It is worse. Declan turned off the tap and threw the towel down. Weariness was showing through his tough exterior. Leo was only the person who delivered it. Russo has someone else on the inside, someone who gave him security rotations, building plans, and the schedule for the underground clinic. Nora felt a chill go through her. Who? Barrett, Declan said without emotion. The name struck Nora like a punch. Barrett was in charge of security for the entire estate. He was a former Marine who had walked Nora through the gardens and had stood guard at her door. He's been giving Russo information for 6 months, Declan went on. Russo offered him $2 million and control of the South Side routes. Barrett is why I almost bled to death on your countertop. Where is he at this moment? Nora's eyes shot toward the hall. Declan glanced at his expensive Rolex watch. He is on the day shift, due at the main gate in 20 minutes. The moment he uses his keycard, the gates will lock him inside. Finnick and I will be in the gatehouse. We will take him alive, locate Russo, and finish this. He came over and cupped Nora's face with his clean hands. His thumbs gently brushed her cheekbones. You will stay in this room. Lock the door. You will not open it for anyone except me or Finnick. Do you understand me? Declan, promise me, he insisted, his voice thick with a desperate need. Barrett is a trapped animal. If he knows that we know, he will use the only leverage in this house I am not willing to lose. He kissed her on the forehead, a long protective gesture, before he walked out. The heavy door clicked, and the sound of the deadbolt locking echoed with finality. Nora paced her room, watching the fog swirl outside the large windows. 7 o'clock passed, then 7:15. There were no gunshots or shouting, only the crushing quiet of the huge house. At 7:30, the power suddenly went out. The gentle light from the lamps disappeared. The hum of the air conditioning stopped. The backup generators did not turn on. A power failure this complete meant the main grid and all the emergency systems was cut manually, a move only the head of security could make. The handle of her bedroom door turned. Nora moved back, her heart pounding in her chest. A sharp electronic beep from a master keycard echoed in the dark. The lock clicked open. Barrett came into the room. His usual calm and professional look was completely gone. He was sweating, his eyes were wild, and he held a silenced pistol. "Get away from the window," Barrett commanded as he shut the door behind him. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "Declan knows," Nora said, making her voice sound cold and distant. "Finnick is waiting for you at the gate." "I know," Barrett sneered back. "That's why I came in through the old tunnels by the lake. Fitzpatrick made a big mistake leaving you up here alone while he was out chasing ghosts." He walked across the room quickly, grabbed Nora roughly, and pushed the cold metal suppressor right against the side of her head. "Walk," he ordered, pushing her toward the door. "You are my ticket out of here. Fitzpatrick will let me leave through the front door if it means keeping your head in one piece." While Barrett pushed her down the large, curving staircase, Nora's mind raced. She thought about anatomy charts and pressure points. Barrett was bigger and had a gun. A direct fight would be suicide. But she was not just a waitress anymore. She had saved the life of a mafia boss. She knew exactly how the human body works and how to make it fail. They got to the huge marble entrance hall. The strong mahogany front doors were 50 feet away. "Stop right there, Barrett." The loud voice came from the second-floor landing. Declan stood at the top of the stairs, a black assault rifle aimed right at Barrett's chest. Finnick suddenly appeared from the dining room entrance with his Glock out. 2 more guards came out of the library. They had him completely surrounded. "Drop the weapon, you lying piece of trash," Declan ordered, his voice shaking with intense anger. "Drop it, or I will peel the skin off your body while you watch." Barrett did not even blink. He pulled Nora tighter against his body, pushing the gun harder into her head. "Back off, Fitzpatrick," Barrett yelled, his finger turning white on the trigger. "Put your weapons down or I will cover this marble with her blood. Tell your men to open the doors and get an armored car out front. Now." Declan's jaw was tight. He looked at Nora. Her eyes were wide, but she was not crying. She looked right at him, sending a silent, urgent message. "Do not let him get away." "You are a dead man," Declan said in a low voice, which was much more frightening than his shouting. "Russo is not going to save you. Put the gun down, and I will make your death quick." "Open the doors!" Barrett yelled, taking a big step backward and pulling Nora with him. Nora knew this was her chance. As Barrett moved his weight, he lost his balance for a moment. In a single second, Nora let her body go completely limp, and at the same time, she drove her elbow backward with all her strength. She aimed perfectly, hitting Barrett in his floating ribs, a painful strike to the soft area over his liver. Barrett gasped for air, his body automatically pulling back from the intense pain, which made his grip on her loosen for a second. Nora immediately dropped to the marble floor. "Get him!" she shouted. The entrance hall exploded with noise. 3 silenced shots went off at the exact same time, 1 from Finnick, 2 from Declan. The large bullets sent Barrett flying backward, crashing him right through the glass of a tall, old clock. He slid down to the floor, dead before the last piece of broken glass landed. Silence suddenly filled the room again, with only a ringing sound in Nora's ears. Declan was already down the stairs before the smoke had cleared. He fell to his knees, his rifle falling to the floor, and pulled Nora tightly to his chest. His hands were shaking badly as he checked her for any bullet wounds. "Are you hit?" he asked, the cruel boss completely gone and replaced by a scared man. "Nora, look at me." "I am fine," she said, out of breath, hiding her face in his neck and smelling the gunpowder. "I am okay." Declan hugged her so hard it almost hurt. Finnick kicked the gun away from Barrett's dead hand and took an encrypted phone from his vest. "Boss," Finnick said in a low voice. The last message was a location, a warehouse in Fulton Market. Russo is waiting for him there. Declan slowly moved back from Nora. The fear in his dark eyes turned back into hard, cold ice. He stood up and helped her to her feet. "Get Sophia," Declan commanded Finnick. "Get the mobile medical unit ready. Get every man we have. We are going to Fulton Market." Nora held Declan's hand tighter. "I am going with you." "No, you are staying right here. You were almost killed." Nora replied, her voice filled with complete confidence. "Silas was almost killed in your hallway. Barrett just tried to shoot me in the head. There is no safe place anymore. If you are going to a fight, you are going to need a medic." Declan just looked at her, seeing the strong fire in her eyes. The waitress who used to hide behind the diner counter was gone, and in her place was a woman made strong by his world. A slow, dark smile appeared on his face. "Finnick," Declan said, without ever taking his eyes off Nora. "Get the lady a bulletproof vest." The Fulton Market District in the center of Chicago was a confusing area of old, falling-down meatpacking buildings. Tobias Russo's warehouse was at the end of Kinsey Street, a large brick building that he had used as his secret headquarters for many years. At 9:45 in the morning, that peace was broken forever. 4 armored trucks burst through the chain-link fence, stopping with a loud screech in the middle of the yard. In the back of the third truck, Nora's heart was beating fast against her ribs. She had a heavy bulletproof vest on over her sweater, with a small medical bag attached to her chest. Next to her, Dr. Sophia Calvetti was calmly loading a pump-action shotgun. "Stay down behind the engine," Sophia told her. "You fix the bullet holes. We make them." Before Nora could understand the command, Declan got out of the front truck, with Finnick and 12 heavily armed men behind him. There was no hesitation. Finnick went to the strong steel side door and blew the hinges off with 2 extremely loud shots. Declan kicked the broken metal door in, and the Fitzpatrick crew rushed into the building. The gunfight began right away. It was a loud and messy mix of automatic gunfire and breaking concrete. Russo's men, who were expecting just one person for a hostage trade, were not at all ready for a huge attack. "Medic!" A scared shout cut through the loud sound of the guns. "Go!" Sophia shouted, giving Nora a push on the shoulder. Nora ran across the open concrete as bullets hit the brick walls above her. She slid on the oily floor next to Marco, one of Declan's younger men, who was holding his thigh where a bullet had gone straight through. Her fear was gone, completely replaced by her medical training. Nora tore open his pants, quickly put a tourniquet high up on his leg, and packed the wounds with special gauze to stop bleeding. "You are stable," she ordered, tightening the tourniquet firmly. "Do not move." She looked up through the strange sight of swinging meat hooks. Russo's men were moving back, unable to handle Declan's powerful attack. Declan moved through the fight with a scary kind of skill, his rifle firing in short, controlled shots. He was like a king fighting in the dirt with his men. At the other end of the warehouse, inside a raised office with glass walls, Tobias Russo was yelling into a radio. His silver suit had dust on it as he desperately asked for more men who were never going to come. Declan saw him. Covering fire, he shouted, dropping his empty rifle and pulling out a custom 1911 pistol. While Finnick shot a continuous stream of bullets, Declan jumped over a conveyor belt and ran up the metal stairs, paying no attention to the bullets bouncing around him. He kicked what was left of the office door off its hinges. Nora moved forward quickly, staying low behind a pile of crates to keep him in her view. Inside, Russo lifted a submachine gun. Declan did not hesitate. He shot twice. Bang! Bang! The first bullet hit Russo's right shoulder, making his gun fall to the floor with a clatter. The second bullet hit his right knee, causing the rival boss to fall with a terrible sound. The warehouse became strangely quiet, except for the moans of the injured men. When they saw their boss fall, the last of Russo's soldiers gave up. Finnick's men moved in fast, using zip ties to attach them to support poles. Declan stood over Russo, with smoke slowly rising from his pistol. "You are finished, Toby. Your business is mine. Your name will be forgotten." Russo spat out some blood. "The feds are watching you, Fitzpatrick. They will put you away." "Let them try," Declan said in a low voice, aiming the pistol right between Russo's eyes. "Declan, wait!" Nora's voice carried up the stairs. She went past the broken door frame and into the bloody office. Declan's eyes quickly looked at her, but his gun did not move. "Get out of here, Nora." "He is bleeding out from the femoral artery," Nora said, pointing at the growing pool of dark blood around Russo's injured knee. "If you shoot him in the head, the police will have proof. It will be an execution. But if he bleeds out, he is just another person killed in a gang fight." Declan stared at her. A completely new kind of respect and dark humor appeared on his face. He looked down at Russo, whose pale face was twisted in fear as he understood that his artery was cut. "You hear that, Toby?" Declan said, slowly uncocking the hammer and putting his gun away. "The waitress says you get to bleed." Russo looked at Nora, with both pain and terror in his eyes. "Help me. You are a nurse, please." Nora gazed down at him, her expression a perfect blank slate. She remembered her apartment burned to ash, the cold knife in the alley, and the gun Barrett forced against her head just an hour before. She unclasped her medical kit and placed it on the desk, intentionally out of his grasp. "My shift is over," she said quietly. She turned away from the dying boss and moved toward Declan. His chest rose as he reached out, his strong arms circling her waist and pulling her firmly against him. They strode out of the office, leaving the sound of Russo's desperate, wet gasps to vanish behind them. Moving down the stairs, they stepped over the defeated bodies of their enemies. Finnick gave a quick nod, guiding the other men to the waiting cars. As they exited the dark building, the mid-morning Chicago sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a warm light across the city. Declan paused at the open door of his Escalade. He looked at Nora, gently wiping a streak of dirt and blood from her face. "It is finished," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The city is ours. You will never have to be afraid again." Nora looked at the hard lines of his face and the absolute devotion in his intense eyes. She had rescued him on a dirty diner counter, and in return, he had destroyed her enemies for her. "I know," she said, rising to press her lips against his. "Take me home, Declan." He gave a true, genuine smile that finally cleared the shadows from his eyes. He helped her into the armored vehicle and climbed in next to her as the line of cars roared to life, driving into the city they now commanded together. In the end, surviving in the criminal world is not about who shoots the quickest. It is about who has the ability to mend things after the violence ends. Nora Hayes did not simply save a dying crime boss one rainy Tuesday night. She revived a kingdom and built a new, powerful dynasty. Declan Fitzpatrick understood that real strength was not in a loaded weapon or a hidden bank account, but in the hands of the woman who stood beside him through everything. The Midnight Owl Diner is gone now, replaced by a top-of-the-line trauma clinic, funded by a secret benefactor, and run by a woman who traded her server's apron for a throne. Blood created their bond, violence challenged it, but unbreakable loyalty secured it. They are the undisputed king and queen of Chicago. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.